Hey, what's going on, guys? So I have another pet guide for you today. This one's dedicated to the Skag. And I did a video on the Spider Ant a couple weeks back, but I wanted to spend some time, especially since the pets got buffed recently in the last patch, just going over the Skag variants, what builds I'd recommend, and then what items I'd recommend as well to go along with your Skag pet. So let's get into it. So the first of our four-legged friends that we're going to be covering is the Guard Skag. So the Guard Skag is going to give you 5% increased damage. It's pretty modest, but all of the introductory pets don't really give you crazy stats. And the attack command causes the Skag to vomit acid onto enemies, and it does damage over time. Overall, I mean, I think the attack command for the Skag is pretty good, but the 5% damage increase isn't too noticeable. And I think the Skag by far, especially the Guard Skag, dies the most of all the pets. So I felt like I spent a lot of time having to run in and revive my pet in combat, and I didn't really have that problem with either the Jabber or the Spider Ant. But the plus side to the Guard Skag is that it doesn't kill you with radioactive barrels, so there is that. But I definitely recommend, like, for an intro pet, if you want a pet that's going to allow you to survive a little bit longer, I'd go with the Spider Ant. If you want a pet to help you in combat a little bit more, I would try the Jabber and then maybe just work through the trees until you get to the Great Horn Skag. But overall, the Guard Skag is a pretty solid pet. It does reliable damage, but I really think that survivability is just a huge issue, especially early on in the game when you don't have as much access to good weaponry and health regen abilities. So the next evolution after the Guard Skag is the Great Horn Skag. So your Guard Skag basically evolves into a larger Great Horn Skag and does 5% damage and then plus 10% gun damage. And I really like the look of the Great Horn Skag. I think it's a really nice visual upgrade, even though it still does pee on the floor constantly. So it doesn't evolve in that way. The attack command for the Great Horn Skag charges enemies and then knocks them into the air, doing pretty good damage. For attack commands, I think it was probably middle of the pack as far as damage is concerned. Like a level 50 Great Horn Skag with Go for the Eyes spec'd out will do around 5,000 to 6,000 damage. But what I did notice with the Great Horn Skag and the Skags in general is that they're very good at building up frenzy stacks because they stay in combat for a long time. They don't really have a lot of ranged attacks that they use as part of their attack routine like the Spider Ant would, so you don't really find them trying to back off and aim at different targets. They kind of get in the target's face, they do continuous solid melee damage, and it's normal damage as well, so it scales better with different enemy types. So I would say overall the Great Horn Skag is the best of the three Skag types. It has the best scalability into late game with that 10% gun damage, and I think it narrowly beats out the Iridian Skag for just viability once you're in Mayhem 3. But I would definitely go with the Great Horn Skag if you're looking for a pet that's going to increase your gun damage and do damage on its own too. It's just a very good companion for you, gives you good bonuses, but also does well on its own too. And the last Skag that you get to unlock is the Iridian Skag. So the Iridian Skag increases your damage and fire rate by 5% each, and the Iridian Skag's attack command pulls nearby enemies into a singularity and then explodes, doing damage in an area of effect. So one thing I noticed about the Iridian Skag, first of all, it looks awesome, but the bonuses I think just don't really compete with the 10% gun damage that the Great Horn Skag does. I didn't really seem to notice the fire rate increase all too much. So I really think if you're looking for a late game pet that is more reliable, has better bonuses, I just think the Great Horn Skag beats out the Iridian Skag. Even though the Iridian Skag, for leveling up, I think it does have a slightly better attack command because it's an area of effect. The only issue is that it doesn't crit because it's not a melee attack like the Great Horn Skag's is. So it does a little bit less damage, but it has a little bit more utility and definitely more CC than the Great Horn would have. And I did notice as well, the Iridian Skag's attack command did seem to glitch a little bit less. It was a little bit more reliable. But like I said, in Mayhem 3, when enemies are just doing a ton of damage, I didn't feel like I was getting all that much value out of the Iridian Skag, and found myself going back to the Great Horn just for both the bonuses and the little additional damage it seems to do with its attack command. So overall, if you're going for a late game Skag, I would go with the Great Horn instead of the Iridian. But the Iridian's great for leveling up at least. Alright, so let's go over my skill tree. So I start off in the Master Tree, and I sink a lot of points in here just to maximize my Skag's damage, make them pretty tanky, and then use burst stages for some additional healing. I'm not going to go through every single skill, but a couple of the ones that I have that I think are a little bit different than other builds is I don't go in for who rescued who, just because I feel like it's a little item dependent, and if you don't have certain gear or certain weapons, I really just struggle to keep my pet alive. So I've tried a few variants of the build using that, and I just didn't really see the value of 5 points to justify that purchase instead of going somewhere else, like maybe in Barbaric Yelp. And I use Go for the Eyes just because I like the idea of my pet just doing as much damage as possible. Because I see a lot of people skip out on this just because your pet damage isn't make it or break it later in the game. But I think part of the theory crafting and part of the reason why I like Flak is just seeing how powerful you can make your pet, and it's just fun seeing how much damage that your Skag can do. And it's pretty significant with the attack command. But I find with the Skag as well, your Go for the Eyes procs a lot more often because first of all, they only do melee attacks, and it's easy to kind of micromanage in combat because you can just have your Skag attack separate targets, and it winds up really adding up over time. And for augments, I use Endurance, which increases your pet damage 10% per kill and extends the duration of Gamma Burst. And then I also use Burst Aid just for that 20% max health per second, and it really just helps keep your pet alive for pretty much no cost at all whatsoever, as well as you and your allies. And I also go into the Stalker tree here, and the main focus of the Stalker tree is just to make my pet a little bit tankier and allow my pet to both revive me and reduce the cooldown of Gamma Burst. So this is just to reduce that action skill cooldown and make it so that my pet can sustain within the fight and also from fight to fight without struggling quite as much. Because one of the issues I saw when I didn't have these skills chosen is that my pet wouldn't regen in things like Circle of Slaughter in time. So I'd fight one mob and then go to the other, and my pet would be engaging with half health, where once you invest all of these points, your pet's able to get up to max health really quickly. And that helps even more after the recent buffs. So let's take a quick look at my items here. So the main items I'm going to go over, I don't really have any specific weapon recommendations. Like any high damage weapon would be really good for this build. So there's nothing specific to a pet build that you would really want. If you're using Who Rescued Hugh, I'd recommend like a Cutsman. I've seen a lot of people using the Flacker, rocket launchers, really any AoE weapon. But for this, it's more of a single target build. So anything like the Yuta, the Crossroads, the Dastardly Maggie is very good. A lot of Jacob's weapons are good. Just any sort of single target high DPS weapon is what you'd want to go for here. But the main thing I want to focus on is your modifier, and Red Fang is by far and away the best pet modifier in the game. It allows your pet to taunt enemies whenever Gamma Burst is active, and your pet can't die when it's in Gamma Burst. So with this, the goal of Red Fang is to send your pet into combat, taunt all the enemies, take some of the pressure off you, and then your pet with He Bites will generate frenzy stacks for you. So your pet and your damage is going to be increased, and the goal of the build along with the item is to reduce that action skill cooldown as much as possible. So ideally you want to be just proccing that over and over again without a lot of downtime, and making sure that your pet is constantly keeping aggro off, but healing your pet at the same time with Burst Aid. So I think that the Red Fang synergizes really well with some of the Master Tree abilities, specifically He Bites and Frenzy Stacks, and benefits a lot from Burst Aid. Makes your pet pretty much a walking tank, which is pretty nice. So the Skag was really a double-edged sword for me. On one hand, it doesn't really do a lot of damage. It gets one shot by bosses pretty easily, and it's definitely a lot squishier than some of the other pets. But the bonuses that the Great Horn Skag gives you are much more significant, I would say, than all the other pets in the game. So if you're looking to run a Gamma Burst build, I would definitely work around the Great Horn Skag. But instead of trying to rely on the Great Horn Skag for damage, I would really try to utilize the Great Horn Skag bonuses, because that's kind of one of the issues I have with the Skag. The reason for using the pet isn't because of the pet itself, it's just because of the passive bonuses that it gives you. And I feel like if you're going to be sinking points into the Master Tree, which is definitely the more pet-based tree, then your pet should be much more of a focal point for the damage. But overall, I mean, I'd probably rank the Skag as or last place for all the pets, just because I think you get a little bit more value more easily out of some of the other pets and don't really have to do as much advanced calculus to find a good build. But it's still a lot of fun later in the game trying to see how much damage you can do while in Gamma Burst and in stacking both the Great Horn Skag's passive skills with Barbaric Yelp. But hopefully you guys found the video helpful. I know it's sort of overwhelming with all the pets in the game, so I'm trying to do a breakdown for each one of the pets, and I'll work on a Jabber one pretty soon as well. So thanks for watching, guys.